Welcome to the Inner Scoreboard. I'm Paul Brown, a psychotherapist, a coach, and a lifelong athlete. This podcast is about the game you don't see, the one happening inside every athlete, every coach, every official, frankly, every person. Performance isn't just physical. It's mental, it's emotional, and it's deeply tied to who you believe you are. Here, we explore the intersections of performance, identity, and mental health, both during sport and long after it ends. We'll talk about pressure, confidence, burnout, relationships, and what happens when the game is over or when it stops defining you. Whether you're an athlete, a coach, an official, a parent, or a therapist, this is a space to understand the inner scoreboard that drives performance and shapes identity. Let's get started. We've all been taught that failing is bad. Missing the lift, losing the game, not hitting the standard you set for yourself. And when that happens, the stories we tell ourselves is, I failed. I want to clear something up right away. Failing is not the problem. Yet most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid it. They avoid the hard reps, they avoid the uncomfortable moments, the uncomfortable conversations, they avoid the situations where they might fall short. And in doing that, they also avoid growth. Failing isn't bad. Failing is where growth lives. In the gym, we don't avoid failure. We actually seek it. Those last few reps, the ones where everything starts to shake, where your body is pushed to the absolute limit, that is where adaptation happens. One of the goals of a tough workout is to push to failure. Failing is part of the process of success. So just think about that. Success is not absolute. It is a process, and failing is part of that. It's feedback. It's exposure. It's where you find your edge. Failing is not the problem. Quitting is. Quitting is stopping before the moment that would have created change. It's stopping at rep 7, when 8, 9, and 10 are the ones that actually create growth and adaptation. It's listening to the voice in your head that says, that's enough, when you're still capable of more. It isn't just sport or in the gym. It shows up in parenting, in relationships, in business, and in all aspects of life in general. It's avoiding something because it seems too hard or too uncomfortable. It's only practicing the things you're good at because you're guaranteed success at those things. Failure is a doorway to growth. So the real question is, do you go through the doorway of discomfort, whether it's physical discomfort, psychological discomfort, or emotional discomfort, or do you just turn away and quit? Now, if I'm sitting across from an athlete or a client, this is usually how this conversation goes. So they'll say something like, I feel like I failed. So my first response to that is pretty much always going to be the same. It's going to be, tell me more about that, or tell me what happened. By doing this, I'm trying to get some context, but also trying to understand their definition of failing, because it's different for different people. Most of the time, what they're defining is that they fell short of a goal. So they missed a shot, they had a bad game, either they lost or their team lost. Ultimately, they didn't reach their goal. So if that's failing for them, failing is part of the process. It's what happens after that event. It's what's most important. So do you shut down? Do you avoid it next time? Do you let it define you? Do you stay stuck? Or do you grow from it and move forward? That's the difference. So I'll share an example. This past season, I coached the U14A Peterborough Petes. So I got to give a shout out to the 2012s. They were a great group to work with this year. But our season ended with a loss in the Lakeshore Finals. But was the season a failure? We failed to win that last game. We failed to reach the OMHAs. When we look at the whole thing, I don't think that the season was a failure. We had many micro wins along the way, many micro successes. So before Christmas, we were around 8th or 9th in the league. And we, clawed our way up to 4th in the league by the end of the regular season. And then we made it to the finals. And we took it in a 3-game series. We took it to game 3. There were over 170 players in the league that never even made it to the finals. We won game 2 in that series. And in doing so, we beat a team that had only lost 3 games all season before that, 2 regular season and 1 other playoff game. So our players had pushed to their absolute limits. And in the end, we just got beat by a team that was more prepared and that outplayed us. So to me, not a failure. I think we can tie it back to the title of the podcast. We lost on the outer scoreboard, but as a team, we smashed that inner scoreboard. The real juice is in what happens after the loss. So I could have sat around and felt sorry for myself. I could have blamed the players, could have blamed other coaches. I could have given up on coaching, but I didn't do that. Instead, I took a bit of time off to kind of reset and enjoy a bit of a break after the season. And then I started focusing on next season. So I began evaluating things I did well as a coach last year. And I also started evaluating things that I need to improve upon. And I accepted that there were also some parts of that season and of that series in particular that were outside of my control. One is that I'm not physically on the ice playing the game. I can't control the work ethic of individual players on our team, and I can't control the work ethic of the players on the other team. I can't control coaching decisions that the other team made or the structures that they ran preparing for those games in that series. So although we didn't reach our goals, like I said, there were many micro wins or micro successes along the way. As a team, we pushed to our limits and we used the opportunity to learn and improve. To me, that creates growth. So when we look at the initial comment of, I feel like I failed, I would suggest that that person in therapy talking about that they failed, they didn't fail because they're in therapy talking about it. They're trying to learn from that experience. They're trying to process that experience so they can move forward and be a better version of themselves. I also think it's worth noting that there are some differences between someone who says, I failed, compared to someone who says, I am a failure. So we've explored the I have failed concept. But when someone says, I am a failure, it's something very different. I am a failure speaks to a sense of identity and a core belief. It's something you are instead of something you did. So as a comparison, we could look at the emotions of guilt and shame. Oftentimes they're said at the same time and together, but they're very different emotions, very different words. Guilt is I did something bad. Shame is I am bad. Guilt, in my opinion, can be a useful emotion because it helps push you to do something different, to move forward, to do things in a better way. Shame is not a functional emotion. It's not helpful to you at all, saying that you are bad. And that's what we need to do some work to kind of shift that thinking from that core belief. Saying I am a failure is very similar. So what this mindset does is it interprets any setback or any error as proof of worthlessness. So it functions as a cognitive bias that highlights mistakes and ignores or minimizes achievements. That bias then acts to reinforce the core belief, which creates a perpetual cycle of negative self-assessment. So if you look at, my U14A example, the loss in the finals would reinforce the belief of being a failure, of worthlessness. And that same person might be able to talk to someone else who had a similar experience. They could say, oh, look at all these micro wins that you had. But for themselves, they don't acknowledge them and they don't actually accept them. So why do we avoid failing? What's the cost of failing? Well, I get a client that comes to me and says, why do I hate failing so much? I can relate to this comment because I often say to coaches that I hate losing. I absolutely hate losing, but I also use that as a motivator to kind of push on to try and find ways to win the next time. So a client says to me, why do I hate failing so much? And I would say, because somewhere along the way, you learn that failing means something about you. It's not just about what you did or did not do, but also about who you are. So this goes back to the topic of core beliefs. If what you learned is negative around failing, then you don't just avoid failing, you avoid anything that might expose you to the possibility of failing. You start organizing your life around avoiding it. You play safer, you hold back, you lower your standards, you protect yourself, you avoid and stay in your comfort zone. It's not because you're incapable, but because you don't want to feel like you failed. So, and this shows up in many different areas. So athletes not pushing in training or practicing the skills you're already good at instead of focusing on skills that you need to improve upon. Avoiding difficult conversations, avoiding relationships, generally staying in situations that no longer challenge you. So avoiding the possibility of failing keeps you stuck, because in trying to avoid failing, you also avoid an opportunity for growth. So in sports, it might be that person who doesn't try out for a team because in their mind, they know that they're going to get cut. Well, maybe they will and maybe they won't, but they'll never find out unless they try it. They also lose out on the possibility of improving their game because of the tryout experience. So it might introduce them to somebody new. They might develop a new friendship. Maybe the coach provides some feedback that helps them in their next tryouts. You might make the team. You don't know until you try out. But the fear of failing kept you from an opportunity for growth. Another example is someone who avoids intimate relationships because they've been hurt in the past. I know lots of people that just date, serial daters instead of getting involved in committed relationships. They got hurt once, don't want to get hurt again. So they avoid the opportunity for a deep emotional connection out of a fear that the result may be that they get hurt. So they avoid that potential. So we talked about core beliefs. This can also be a result of different types of attachment, which again starts when you're really, really young. But it reinforces that avoiding risk is a good thing. So let's look at how all of this applies in the weight room. So in the gym, we understand something that most people in life don't pay attention to. If you don't get close to failure, nothing changes. So the first 6 reps or so, they're tough, but they're comfortable. You're going to make through those. But if your goal, you're trying to hit rep 10, then 8, 9, and 10, those reps need to be really challenging. You need to be struggling. You are pushing towards failure in those reps. And that's where the growth begins. That's where the muscle is forced to adapt. If you rack the weight too early, you might feel good in the moment, but you don't stimulate change. So I've had lots of times when I've been in the gym and I've just kind of gone through the motions. It wasn't my limit. It was my decision. Some exercise is better than no exercise. So at least I wasn't sliding back in those situations. But if my goal is to get better, those workouts aren't really helping. So on the other hand, I can talk about my accident recovery. I can still remember the first time I got on a stationary bike after my motorcycle accident. Stuck in the corner. I got off my crutches. I think I may have still been using a cane, but I went into the gym, sat on that bike, and I started pedaling. Zero resistance on the bike. And I lasted 3 minutes. 3 minutes, first workout, and then I had to stop because the pain was just too intense. But I went back the next day and I did a little bit more. And then the day after that, I did a little bit more. And I worked up to the point where I could actually start to leg press again. So first, I got to the point where I was leg pressing just the carriage. Then I started adding weight, getting stronger, stronger. Then I got to the point where I could squat again. Over and over again, I'm squatting. And all of these instances, I would reach failure, and then I would come back the next day. I would keep going. Now, I have to give some credit to my workout partner at the time, BT, because he was there to help push me through some of those limits. But when all was said and done, I reached the point where I was able to squat my pre-accident best again of 500 pounds. Now, that's a lot of weight to be moving for anyone. But after you've had your knee blown out, you've got back injuries and neck injuries, that's a pretty significant accomplishment. And I was able to do that because I kept working towards failure and trying to push through failure. All failure meant to me at that time was that I had found my limit, but it was my limit for that day. And then I would keep going. Life works the same way. Emotionally, mentally, physically. The growth is in finding your limits and doing the next reps that you want to avoid. So the mind plays an incredible part in pushing through failure and pushing to your limits. So people will ask me, well, why do I keep stopping before reaching my limits? It really comes down to mindset. So Bill Beswick is a sports psychologist in the United Kingdom. And when he has athletes come to work with him, he says he has 3 questions for them. So what do you want? How badly do you want it? And how much are you willing to suffer? So really, it's number 3 that separates casual athletes from elite performers. Lots of people set goals, right? Everyone can really want to reach those goals, but not everyone will sacrifice to reach those goals. Pushing to failure, trying again, reevaluating your shortcomings, they all require the right mindset. So here's what people don't realize. It's not your body that hits the wall first. It's your mind. Your brain is designed to protect you. So protection equals safety, which equals survival. That's what you're designed to do. Your brain is designed to create environments that keep you safe so you can survive, so that you can live. Our brain is not designed to push us. So it sends a signal. It sends a signal, that's enough, you're done, this is too much. But those signals are often early. The default setting in your brain is to quit long before your body. You're not done. You're just uncomfortable. Pushing through that discomfort, the suffering, as Beswick puts it, that is the difference. It requires cognitive restructuring to reframe the discomfort as a good thing because it's bringing you closer to the ultimate goal. Accepting that, yeah, it is uncomfortable, and committing to push through the discomfort because of the goal or outcome. So I think back to that first time on the stationary bike after my accident. I was done after 3 minutes. The pain set in long before that, but I continued. I had to kind of differentiate between, well, is this, pain, is it, we say a good pain or a bad pain? Is it helpful? Is it unhelpful? Was I causing damage to the joint by being on the bike? Or was I just extremely weak and sensitive in that area because of a lack of use for so long? Either way, I could have done the 3 minutes, felt pain, stopped, and sat on the couch for the next 2 years feeling sorry for myself. Instead, I got on the bike again the next day, and then the next day, and we already talked about how that story rolls out. So in that moment, pushing to those limits and coming back the next day, those were the reps that counted, and that was about mindset. I had to be prepared to work through that. So another example, think of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. This is mindset. If you want to be really good at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you need to accept the fact that you're going to get choked out. You're going to get put into arm bars, and arm bars suck. They do not feel good. I've been in many arm bars, and it's not a fun experience. But you have to accept that those things are going to happen if you're going to train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And if you want to get good at them, you have to experience that. So if you stop after the first time you've been choked out or the first time you've been put in an arm bar, you're never going to be great at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So pushing the limits and coming back again, that's the difference. That's the mindset that I have to accept that this is going to be uncomfortable, and I have to commit to coming back, and I have to commit to working through this program. So what does quitting actually look like? Well, it's not always obvious, and it's not always dramatic. It's not always walking away. Sometimes quitting is holding back, not trying again, avoiding the situation next time, letting one loss define you. That's quitting. It isn't the mistake itself. It isn't the missed shot. It isn't losing the game. It's the withdrawal. It's stepping away from the potential for growth. So I think of a lot of players that, they've had a bad shift, maybe something they did led to a goal being scored. And they come off the ice and the shoulders are all slouched over and they sit on the bench and, not even watching the game, head is down, maybe their head is in their hands, or maybe a player's, coach has told that player they need to sit a shift for whatever reason. Same body language, same behavior, and they just sit down totally dejected and let that one shift or that one error define their game. And unfortunately, it sometimes does define their game because they don't have the same jumper intensity the next time they go out. Others will, they'll come off and their mindset is different. Okay, there was some adversity. And they might say, hey, coach, what can I do differently next time? Then they go out for their next shift and they try to implement that change and they have a different energy. So the one who sat down dejected, they gave up. They quit. The one who busted their ass in the next shift, they grew. So it's the same initial circumstance, different mindset, different response, which creates a different outcome. So how can we apply this to our everyday life? Well, I think about in parenting, it's, sometimes having those really uncomfortable conversations. So I think about the talk. So, my guys are 13 and 15. So I had decisions to make when they were starting to come into adolescence about whether I have the talk with them about healthy relationships or sex ed. Do I want them to learn it just in school or on the street? Or do I actually want to be a part of that conversation with them? So some, they're going to avoid that conversation because it's awkward, it's uncomfortable. Others are going to plan how to have that conversation, and they're going to find a time to actually connect with their children and have that dialogue, even though it's uncomfortable. So the way I handled it, I waited until we were on our way to a tournament. They were stuck in the truck for 2 hours. And I thought, well, they can't get out and I can't get out. So we're going to have this conversation. And yeah, it was uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable for them and it was uncomfortable for me. But we both grew through that conversation each time I had it. So I had it once with my oldest and once with my youngest. And in both of those situations, they grew and I grew. And now we're actually able to have conversations about relationships or safe sex. And it's not weird and awkward because we already had that moment of connection and growth before. So in relationships, it's also about having hard conversations. So you might be upset about something and you can avoid it and just keep living that perpetual cycle of being uncomfortable and unhappy. Or you can actually have the conversation with your partner to say, hey, I didn't like it when you did X, or it really upset me when this situation occurred, or even just, these are my feelings today. So your partner is aware of how you're feeling. Uncomfortable conversations, but if you have them, then it creates a better dialogue with your partner and can actually create a more meaningful and deeper connection with them, which can help your relationship last longer. In work and in business, it can be that person who's just kind of they feel stuck in their job. Yes, it pays the bills and they keep going to work day after day, but they're never truly happy. Those people, they might be risk averse. Well, if I leave, then I might not be able to do X, Y, and Z. What they're missing is that if they leave, they may be able to do A, B, and C. So looking at other opportunities that can still pay your bills and maybe be more fulfilling. So those are different arenas, but they're the same patterns. If you're willing to fail, you give yourself a chance to grow. If you avoid failing, you are guaranteed to stay the same. So here's the shift I want you to make. Stop asking, did I fail? And start asking, did I quit? Because if you showed up, if you pushed your limits, if you stayed in it when it got hard, you didn't fail. You trained, you adapted, you grew. Don't avoid failure. Embrace it. Failing isn't the problem. Quitting is. The next time you hit that moment, that rep, that shift, that conversation, when everything in you wants to stop, ask yourself, do I have one more rep? That's the one that creates growth and change. This is the Inner Scoreboard Podcast, where performance, identity, and mental health meet. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who needs the reminder. You're not failing. You're just closer to growth than you think. If there's a topic you want me to cover, please hit me up on Instagram at Paul Brown Coaching. You can also connect with me through my website, paulbrowncoaching.com. And you can check out content on my YouTube channel as well, Paul Brown Coaching. Thanks for joining, everybody. We'll see you next time.